If you have ever had to hire someone for anything, I guarantee that you have probably done this. Now, as a sort of background, as context, one of the things in almost every place I've worked, that I used to love doing, I used to loathe doing, was recruiting people. Can you imagine? Like, it's an industry that's so transitory. It's got its built-in revolving door. So you're always having to play catch up. It was like once in a while you could breathe and go, okay, we have the crew. We've got the bodies. We've got the staff. Most of the time you were out there trying to rattle the bushes, and even, long time ago, putting ads in the paper, the newspaper. Oh my goodness. Trying to find people. And it was hard because you had to deal with the shortage in the meantime. So you're doing your day-to-day stuff, plus either doing the work yourself or begging or bribing people to stay. Can you stay just an extra few hours? Or can you come in? It was always trying to keep your head above water. And so recruiting could be stressful, absolutely, especially when there's no one out there, no one qualified. But it can be joyful in some ways because you're getting to meet a lot of people. And even though they may not all be for that industry, maybe in the wrong industry, I've met many that was not their industry. I met some wonderful pianists and, writers and carpenters who were looking for cook's jobs. It was just a wonderful way to connect with people and to talk to people. It was really cool. Anyway, I fell for probably one of the trickiest psychological things out there when it comes to recruiting. And this goes to what I said just a moment ago. If you have recruited in any way, in fact, I would say that you do this on a regular basis without you even knowing it. And what is it? There's two things, in fact. One is called the halo effect, and one's called the horn effect. Or horns. Take your pick. So the halo effect it's a bias. It's a cognitive bias that essentially it's kind of a way of saying judging a book by its cover. That's the simplest way of saying it. It's where you have an impression of someone or a single aspect of something that influences your whole impression about them, right? Normally generally this comes to appearances. It's the classic example is that people will see someone that's attractive to them, and they will assume, because it's cognitive bias, assume that person is kind, intelligent, and sociable, and all those kind of things. We tend to attribute positive characteristics to this attractive person, even though we've never interacted with them, or maybe just for a moment. It's the halo effect is like it's an error in our judgment. And it's us projecting our own preferences, prejudices, and perceptions, right? And this I'm going to talk about the individual, just broadly speaking. This can also mean brands. So, people that are so loyal to, let's say, Apple or something, to them, Apple can create no bad product. Every product is awesome. It's like a warped loyalty. And the halo effect, it can influence our decisions, which is when I was recruiting, one of the challenges I had was and I remember this specifically, this one person, it was a young woman, and she came in, and there was just something about her that I thought, I don't know what it was. It felt like there was something about her that reminded me of me when I was in that position of this up and coming cook. Right? And so I formed this overly positive impression of her based on something. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't appearance. It was something about maybe her humor. Because I'm a funny guy. Hey. To myself, at least. Maybe it was just her schooling, or there was something. There was something about her. I said, oh my gosh, she's just like me. Now, there was nothing inherently wrong with that, quote unquote. But the problem is that, see, this young woman did not last long. And I'll tell you why. Because when the halo effect kicks in, we put unrealistic expectations on them. I already set a high bar for her, even though she had just sat in front of me for like 5 minutes, not knowing anything about her other than scanning her resume and talking to her for a few minutes. I put this high bar because that's the kind of bar that I had set for myself back then. And so I had played her up in a way. And I think I put her in a position she was not ready for, right? Or I pushed her to speed up because I'm like, oh no, she can handle it. She can do it. And it didn't work out at all. I don't know if we had to let her go or if she walked out. Not walked out, but, resigned. And it's something that happens often. There's something about a person that we form an impression upon them that gives us that it forms an impression that is not fair to them, right? And this is something that we all do. Like there's a study that said, when people rate servers or hotel staff or whatever, one study, what they found is that the more attractive people were rated higher by their customers compared to others, right? There was a study that published, where was it? I can't remember. I remember reading about this, that on average, attractive food servers, and again, attractive, whatever, societally attractive or just to the individual, they earned about over $1,000 more a year in tips compared to their quote unquote unattractive counterparts. And this happens a lot, right? Again, this is judging a book by its cover. Now, I'm talking more about on the work side and stuff like that, not necessarily broader speaking where we just find someone attractive and we're just going to go with that. And by attractive, it can also mean traits. If I find them charismatic, if I find them funny, if I find them just really humble or gentle or whatever it is, there's something that we just tune in on, and we make that their whole personality. Do you feel me? You know what I'm talking about? And why do we do that? I don't know. We're humans. But, some of the and here's the funny thing. I know I'm jumping all over the place. I had coffee. Actually, coffee doesn't get me too jazzed up. It's just it's Friday. I'm ready to rock and roll. One of the things that happens with this sort of cognitive bias is that we will do everything to make our assumption true. Do you know what I'm saying? So this young woman who is struggling, I'm like, no, she can do it. And even though guys were saying, Paul, I don't know if she was the best hire. No, trust me, she's awesome. She's gonna blossom. She's just because I was blind to my own prejudice, right? Which is what we do when we have these cognitive biases. And I also didn't want to admit that maybe I was wrong, right? And so we jump on that one trait and we just run with it. And we're like, yeah, that's good. And sometimes we just want to feel good about us making a decision. Like, I'm smart. I can recruit really well. And the reality is that sometimes I would drop the ball, Sometimes, and here's the other thing. Sometimes people really interview well. It has nothing to do with halo effect. But sometimes they would interview well. I'm like, oh, they sound cool and all that. And then it would be a flop. Which is why in a lot of places you have them come in for a day, like half a day or a day, or sometimes a couple places I worked, we'd have them come and do like a cooking test. So there was all sorts of other ways. So we didn't have to fall into this halo effect. It's kind of like another example, just to give you, is when we see someone, again, that we consider good looking, quote unquote, and they have a foreign accent. What do we do when someone we think is like hot and they have an accent? Ooh, that accent's so sexy. Oh, so lovely, isn't it? Yum, 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 whatever, right? But imagine that same person with that same accent, but we found them unattractive. We might think that accent was harsh, awkward, ugly. And we sometimes will think someone that has an accent must be dumb, right? They sound, even though they're speaking our language, and it's probably like their third language and probably speaking it better than us, right? But that is part of, actually, that is not so much the halo effect. It can be. The opposite is either they call it the reverse halo effect or the horns effect. If the halo is like an angel, the horns is kind of like the devil, right? That happens when we assume something about them, but more in a negative light, right? The sort of classic example is you see someone who is larger, living in a larger body, and we stereotype them as being lazy or irresponsible because they're carrying extra weight. Or we might think someone that didn't go to a prestigious school, maybe the one we went to or some, they're not very good. So, and this goes, without getting into this might be another episode, but then we get into race and gender and sexual, all this kind of stuff. Then it gets into other things. And so again, it's our prejudices and our biases that come to the forefront. And this is really important because when we step into that space, and often we don't know that we're doing it. That's the insidious part, is we often don't catch ourselves doing it. And that's why, let's say for recruiting, sometimes that's why they do, interviews with several people, not just one. There's what's called blind hiring. And so what they'll do is they'll remove things like information, like names, or maybe not that people put photos, but if there were photos, they would remove that. They would do things to remove any kind of cognitive bias. They've done a study, I can't remember. I should have looked at this before I jumped on here, where like someone's name, like just the name, and they had studied like if the same resume, same CV, just with with someone's given name, and from somewhere outside of North America, and especially if it's something that is unusual to us or might be hard to spell or hard to pronounce, whatever, they would put that in front of a study group, and then they would have the same resume and put an anglicized name. And guess who got more calls for interviews? I mean, don't have to be a psychology doctor, professor to figure out who got the more callbacks. And so when that incident happened with that one girl in particular, it kind of shook me up. I'm like, okay, where did I go wrong? Because I would always look back and like, how come that one didn't work out? And I had read up back then, this was years ago, about the halo effect. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was me. That was totally me. And so what I did from that point on is when I did catch myself, sometimes I'm like, don't get too excited, Paul. Don't get like, I would be talking for 2 or 3 minutes and immediately, like if I was single and I was looking for a partner, like 5 minutes, like I'm already moving in with them, It's like that. If you're dating, it's that immediate like boom. And I would catch myself. I'm like, okay, slow it down, Silva. Let's look at the other stuff. Let's talk like come at a neutral place. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And even when I catch myself at the grocery store or walking on the street and I'm starting to judge the book by the cover, because it's so for part of us, it's so intuitive, not intuitive, but it's just our instinctual, I guess. It's always, I have to pull back and say, why am I making such, but that's what judgment is, by the way. Judgment is, it's not always necessarily a bad thing. Judgment is just, you're making a quick assessment based on limited information in a very short span of time. That's what judgment is. And that can be helpful at times. That can give us a quick snapshot of someone when we don't have time or availability to get more information. Is it always right? No, of course not. But it gives us something to work on. The problem is that when we base everything on that initial judgment, that's where we get into trouble. And so I will see someone and immediately go, I don't like them. I don't like their shoes. Look at that hair. What a jerk. Like we all do that based on nothing. And when I catch myself, I ask, what am I projecting? What am I projecting? What am I blocking off? Because when I make that snap decision that I don't like someone based on absolutely nothing. Now, of course, if they're beating a puppy, I may have something to base it on. But if they're just walking the street minding their own business and I come up with something, it's like, okay, why am I doing that? Like what? Either I let it go and say, I'm sure they're a lovely person, and I walk away. Or if it's really needling me, like, what is this bringing up for me? Like, why am I getting so caught up in this? And it's something that we all do. It's something that we all do. And when we can rein it back and rein it in a little bit and realize that we're all just doing the best that we can. And some of us have it harder. Like truly. I don't know what it's like. Listen, I'm a straight white male. Middle-aged. So now my parents are from your way. They're Latino. I don't identify as Latino. It's not my culture. It's my heritage, but it's not my culture. So as a straight white man, I don't know what it's like in so many ways to be profiled or to be, my gosh, I didn't want to get into, this is another episode, but, I don't have to deal with racism and sexism and all that kind of stuff. I don't have to worry about going into the walk-in fridge and having some creepy guy cornering me, trying to grope me or trying to say something inappropriate, or someone's, whispering a slur as I walk by. I've never had to deal with that. It's a place of privilege, absolutely. And so I always made sure that, especially when it's a demographic or a sector of the population that is regularly or maybe normally oppressed or, disenfranchised, whatever you want to call it. I always made sure that I'd be on their side. And again, not blindly, but I realize how much we judge a book by its cover. I realize how I've heard it. Believe me, I've heard it. I may not have been the victim, but I've heard it. And anytime I could, I spoke up. And people didn't really like that, by the way. It shatters their image of you, by the way. I don't know where I'm going with all this, by the way. But it's something that I think about often. And when I was thinking, what am I going to share today? That came up, that young woman came up right away. And I was like, okay, let's look at this. Because as speaking for myself, as I grow older, I tend to look at people with a lot more grace. I tend to look at people with a lot more bandwidth and space around them. I don't assume the worst. It can happen in moments, but I just really reel it back and check in with myself. And I also make sure that I'm not putting the halo effect on people. And it's really coming from a place of neutrality. And as you get to know people, of course, there's going to be things about them that aren't going to jive with you and vice versa. But how do we step into this place of just that grace? And it to me, it's just practice. And really allowing to see others as they are and not in the way that you would like to see them, which is part of that cognitive bias. We're so bent in wanting them to show up in the way that we expect. And when they don't, what happens? Resentment, disappointment. That's why we don't put people on pedestals. Because at some point they are going to do or say something that we have created in our mind, the person that they are. They're going to say something counter to that or do something counter to that. And we're going to go, oh my God, you're not the person I thought you were. Of course not. Because they are who they are. It's not their fault you created a reality or image of them. Our job is not to live up to what other people think we are. Our job is to be us. So why are we wasting our time trying to please everyone? There's no point. At some point, People are going to not like you no matter what. The horns effect. There's going to be something about you that reminds them of maybe an ex, or reminds them of the uncle that harmed them, could remind them of the teacher that they hated. Your cologne or perfume is going to set someone off. Your shoes are going to set someone off. The way you smile is going to set someone off. It doesn't matter. And so you're going to have people that don't like you, just what I said. The way that we can look at someone and go, what a jerk. Look at that mullet. Now, mullets might be, I don't know. Maybe that's a bad just kidding. Mullet away, my friends. Mullet away. But the same happens to us. How many times probably have you walked down the street minding your own business and someone was just giving you the dagger eyes inside? Just look at that mustache. What a perv. This is all to say, let's just be kinder to others. Catch ourselves when we're putting things on them that is not for them to take. And also when people put stuff on us, that we recognize that it's not ours as well. And that takes discernment, that takes self-awareness, it takes courage. And it involves just having a good, strong healthy sense of self. So those are all the good things that we're always talking about, because in the real world, people are going to make these snap judgments as we do. So let's just be kinder to each other, kinder to ourselves, and all that good stuff. By the way, this was Seared, Stories from the Stove podcast. My name was, and always will be Paul Silva. So thank you for being here. If this has been helpful in any way, please share it, comment, like, subscribe, do the whole doodly diddly thing. And I wish you well. I wish you well. Kitchen's closed. Now scram.